Literary prejudice is a funny thing. All of us are guilty of it. The more we know our own tastes as readers, the more set in our ways we become, about the things we value in a book and our personal subjective notions of merit. The more we all become adept at judging a book by its genre, by its subject matter, and, let's be honest, by its cover. When I first got a job in publishing, my Uncle Patrick bought me a copy of a biography of one of the world's great publishers. It was called Maxwell Perkins, Editor of Genius, by A. Scott Berg. It won the National Book Awards in the US the year it came out. The book was great, and Perkins made for a fascinating subject. He's the man who discovered F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway, by any measure, a hugely influential figure in the world of books. But there's one line in that book that's really stayed with me more than any other. Perkins said, apparently, publishers aren't looking for the next big thing, they're looking for the last big thing. In the guessing game that is publishing, imitation is the safe path. It's why at some point in the early 2000s, every second YA book was part of some multi-book series about an orphan with unexpected magical powers at some kind of secret boarding school. If something works, the theory seems to go, then just repeat it, again and again and again. In the world of crime fiction, if you walk into your local bookshop or library, it's not hard to extrapolate what's worked in recent years. Gone are the serial killer slashers and the Nordic noir. What seems to be proliferating now is books with cosy, even twee covers, handwritten titles, a line drawing of some safe domestic item, and a convoluted name that could have been generated by ChatGPT. The Beethoven Society in the Afternoon at the Vicarage, or The Sunset Bicycle Thieves, or Tea Time at 13 Windermere Avenue, that kind of thing. Beware the imitators, but follow where they're leading you. Take that trail all the way back to the books that kicked off this latest trend, because Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club series are true originals. Funny, moving, gripping, and anything but generic. If you've read them, and based on their stratospheric sales, there's a reasonable chance you have, you're already entirely in the tank. And if you haven't, put your prejudices aside and settle in. You're in for a treat. I'm Michael Williams, and this is Read This, a show about the books we love and the stories behind them. You might already be familiar with Richard Osman for his TV work. He's the creator and presenter of the BBC game show Pointless. Maybe you've seen him on one of those ubiquitous British panel shows like Taskmaster, or Would I Lie to You, or QI. Richard Osman wears many hats, from television producer to comedian to podcaster. Now, however, it's as a best-selling author he's most known, and he's going from strength to strength. There are 4 books so far in the Thursday Murder Club series, following the amateur sleuthing of a quartet of septuagenarian residents of an aged care community called Cooper's Chase. They're about mortality and old age, and they're both funny and page-turners. It's little wonder they've become international bestsellers. The first book in the series is being adapted into a movie starring Pierce Brosnan, Helen Mirren, and Ben Kingsley. But 4 books in, 4 bestsellers in, Richard's changing it up. He's launching a whole new series with a whole new set of characters. We Solve Murders follows the retired cop Steve and his bodyguard daughter-in-law Amy in a novel that shows that Richard Osman knows exactly what his readers want. When we had the chance to speak last year, I did a reread back through the Thursday Murder books, and one of the things that struck me was that in the first one, there is a kind of centrality, maybe even a default centrality to Chris and Donna, your 2 police characters, that perhaps with the first book, active police officers seemed like a natural entry point for telling the kind of crime story you wanted to do. And as the series has gone on, they've not receded entirely, but they've certainly given way on centre stage.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, when starting a new series, was it clear to you again, formal law enforcement isn't a framework that interests you terribly?
Yeah, largely because, and this is a subconscious thing, I think if you set something properly within the world of law enforcement, you have to do a lot of research. And that's something that doesn't interest me. If I'm spending an hour of working on We Solve Murders, I want it to be an hour typing up and, writing something rather than an hour looking into whether a deputy chief inspector is a higher rank than whatever. I'm not interested in doing it. And I like the world of criminality. I'm very interested in that world. So Amy in this book, who's the daughter-in-law, is a bodyguard, which is a big industry and an industry that is around celebrity, but also around criminality. Steve is an ex-cop. There's lots of people who are in that lovely hinterland between criminal and law enforcer. And that to me is an interesting world where the police don't really need to get involved. There's very little police work in this book. And what police work there is fairly toxic, I would say.
You're very good at writing kind of makeshift and found families.
Yes.
And the familial relationship between Steve and Amy, the father-in-law, daughter-in-law pairing, I can't remember seeing that particular configuration before. Was that what drew you to it, or is there something about that closeness but with distance built in that particularly appealed?
The question that makeshift or found family, I've not thought about it in that way, but I do like to write about that. It's an interesting combination, isn't it, that father-in-law, daughter-in-law, because there is an absolute closeness, but you're not related by blood, and it's very possible to have a relationship with an in-law that is very distant. Amy, who is the daughter-in-law and the bodyguard, was brought up in the care system. Steve, who is the ex-cop father-in-law, is a fairly recent widower. And so they both have something they find in each other. They both find a need to lean on each other. And neither of them, by the way, would ever speak that out loud or have any interest in speaking that out loud. But they're both from places and families where they don't have those connections anymore. They both need a connection. So I love writing about that thing of where we find love and how we find it and who we need and who actually cares for us. And people who find it difficult to love or be loved, loving each other, I always think feels very powerful to me. But I love that the father-in-law, daughter-in-law thing. That's where it all started. I just thought, that's an interesting world, and then I explored it from there. Really,
the backgrounds that both of them have that you just described there give you the chance for a kind of set of thematics that are very reminiscent of Thursday Murder Club around the things that we live for and the things that we're frightened of. Steve, to a certain extent, there are ways in which he has let his life become deliberately small in the wake of the loss of his wife. Whereas for Amy, it's about seeking that adrenaline, seeking that rush that gives her life meaning and shape. Do you think in those terms often about fear and courage?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's two big responses to trauma, aren't there? And they represent two of those. The two big responses are either to run or to hide, and so Amy runs and she goes around the world and, never stays still, never stays in the same place. So she doesn't, she can't confront herself with whatever it is that she doesn't want to be confronted with. And Steve, as you say, he hides and he makes everything very small and he protects himself and he makes sure nothing can get in. And those are two very, very common responses to any sort of trauma. And I like the fact that the two of them, and by the way, that wasn't a deliberate choice or anything. It's just, I find both of those interesting responses. And I wanted their actions to have an opposition to each other. I wanted Amy to need to do one sort of thing, and I needed Steve to absolutely not want to do that sort of thing at all. Then suddenly you've got whatever scene you do, you've got someone who doesn't want to be there, but has to be there. And just as a writer, and if you want comedy, if you want pathos, if you want any of that stuff, it's all in there. But yeah, so one of them runs and one of them hides, but they both love each other.
I want to ask you about Rosie as a character. Can you set her up for those listeners who haven't read the book yet?
I certainly can. So, I had this central duo in mind, Steve and Amy, and that was great. And then I thought, you know what? Amy does have to have a client at the start of this, which needs to be looking after somebody. So I thought, I'll give her a client and I'll just have a conversation and just find out a bit about who Amy is, which is how I like to come up with characters. I'll stick them in a situation, make them have a conversation. And I had this sort of idea of a Jackie Collins-esque type character who's living on her own sort of private island. And so it's this character, Rosie D'Antonio, who's the world's best-selling author, if you don't count Lee Child. And I had this conversation between Amy and Rosie, where essentially as a writer, I'm trying to find out about Amy, trying to get a little bit about what she care about, what does she like at her job. And Rosie just was sitting there with like a cocktail in the middle of a pool shaped like a swan. Just the stuff she was saying, I was like, oh my God, you're amazing. And I've got Steve and I've got Amy, which is lovely, but why don't I have a third wheel on this journey? Somebody who literally lives through adventure, lives through mischief, is of absolutely indeterminate age. No one has the first clue of how old she can be. There are certain biographical clues that lead us to believe she might be fairly old, but she just wants fun. She wants adventure. And of course, we find out a bit more about her as the book goes on as well. But suddenly I've got these three people, and any scene that comes along, I know it's funny if one of them is in charge of that scene. I know anything I can come up with in the plot. I know I've got these three people who can carry us anywhere. And so the two-hander absolutely accidentally became a three-hander, but I'm delighted that it did. I think people will love Rosie. She's quite a scene stealer.
Oh, I have no doubt. She says at one point early on something along the lines of, "I'd rather be murdered than be bored," which I think is not a bad credo. That's
yeah, exactly that. That very much sums it up. And it's funny you say that, because to me, that's the process of writing. I do it quite a lot via dialogue, and so I'm just having a conversation, and Amy says something or other, and then Rosie says, "I'd rather be murdered than bored." And you think, okay, great, that's a tent peg. I can absolutely knock that into the ground and start my understanding of who Rosie is, and that's like one of the top notes of who she is. And that's such a lovely way of creating characters. Just have them talk to each other, and then them say something. You go, oh, well, that's a bold statement, and let's find out who you are, via that. But yeah, I'd rather be murdered than bored. And she means it too.
Having invented Rosie, having invented a very successful crime novel, how tempted are you to try your hand at writing Death Pulls the Trigger?
Oh, I mean, every time I come up with a title for a Rosie D'Antonio book, there's like Knock Knock, Who's Dead? TikTok, It's Death O'Clock. You're like, I just absolutely want to read this now. If any fan fiction versions of it want to come out. But, I love the idea of, we don't really have a Jackie Collins of crime, particularly. And it'd be a fun label for someone to get. But yeah, I want to see the front covers. I want to see the sort of American TV adaptation of these things. But yeah, her whole world, I so desperately want her to be real.
But you clearly have fun with naming things. The other name that I'm particularly enamored with in this book is Steve's very imaginative name for his private investigation company, which is called Steve Investigates, much to Amy's horror.
Yeah.
Details like that are a great way into character, aren't they? I mean, that says everything about Steve and the way his mind works that you need it to.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. The choices we make, and yeah, who would call their investigation company Steve Investigates? Because Amy, by the way, wants to call it, I think, like Maverick Steel or something like that. She says no, because branding is important. And Steve goes, well, look, my name's Steve and I investigate. And it's a simple thing, but there you go. Okay, I understand where those two characters are coming from now. I understand the oppositions there might be. I understand the kind of pull and push we might have just from a simple thing like that. But it speaks to the title of the book, We Solve Murders, being the name of a detective agency. It's like, well, I mean, it's the second I had that title, when I was talking to my agent after with Thursday Medical Club, I said, look, I've got this new idea, I want to do it. I said, look, it's not going to be called this, but at the moment it's called We Solve Murders. And she went, oh, that's a great name for a book. Yeah. I said, yeah, but I can't recall the book We Solve Murders. It's very on the nose. And she was like, no, that's I think people will love that. And I go, oh, okay. So honestly, if I had an investigation agency, it would be called Richard Investigates. So, We Solve Murders.
When we come back, Richard reveals the reason he probably won't be writing a 600-page Booker Prize-winning novel, and shares the advice he gave to Pierce Brosnan.
Everyone remembers the first step on the moon. What if it had been the last? This Kingdom of Dust by David Dyer reimagines the moon landing from the eyes of Buzz, stuck on the moon, his wife Joan, trapped on Earth by society's expectations of her, and Aquarius, a journalist compelled to craft a story he doesn't want to write. This Kingdom of Dust reframes what the moon landing meant for all humankind. This Kingdom of Dust is out now.
As America heads into its presidential election with ever-increasing mistrust and misinformation, the question on everyone's mind is, what went wrong? Journalist Nick Bryan's best-selling book, The Forever War, argues that the roots of the hate we see in America today can be found in its troubled past. and how the rise of Donald Trump has been 250 years in the making. The Forever War offers a perceptive look at America's unending conflict with itself. The Forever War by Nick Bryan is out now.
How far into the Thursday Murder books did you realize that you wanted to try and cut your teeth on a different series?
I think that, when I wrote the first Thursday Murder Club book, all I wanted to do was write a book that sold enough copies they let me write the second book, and then sold enough that make me write the third. And I think I got sort of 3 or 4 years in, and I thought, well, listen, I am an author now. I've always been a writer. I've done journalism, I've done sitcom, I've done all sorts of things, but I finally think, okay, now you are an author. And if I'm going to do this for the next 20, 30 years, which I'm very hopeful that I am going to do, I'm not going to just write the same series. So I wanted to introduce a new world to people. I wanted to introduce new characters. I wanted to have a bit of fun with something. I want to enjoy the next 20 years, and I want readers to really, really enjoy the next 20 years as well. And I'm going to do that by inventing different worlds and showing people different things and seeing if they bite, I think.
Not only is it a new world and a new set of characters, but it is, in genre terms, a kind of slight sideways step. It's still unmistakably a Richard Osman book, which is a great thing to be able to say if you think that 5 years ago we couldn't say what a Richard Osman book was. But now you've kind of made it your own. But this one has as much of a debt to kind of thriller conventions as it does to the old idea of the cozy, even though I know that's a term that you reject.
Yeah, I wanted to, there's certain things, I love the Thursday Murder Club so much, and I love those 4 characters. There are things that they cannot really do. They can't jump out of helicopters. They're probably not going to go on a breakneck race around the world. And that's the sort of thing I wanted to write, because, again, I read crime fiction, I read thrillers, big airport stuff. That's the kind of stuff I love. And so I thought, well, I want to bring the sensibility that I have, hopefully a bit of the wit, hopefully a bit of that kind of British warmth, to a more thrillery type story. Listen, I haven't written a kind of hard-boiled thriller. It's unmistakably me, page 1 onwards. But as you say, I know the conventions of that genre because I read that genre and I love that genre, and I never do any of this stuff consciously. But I just being able to write in that world, but to be able to bring what I love to bring to books, which is character and heart and wit and warmth and feelings, was a really lovely challenge and something that, I enjoyed a great deal.
I can't help but notice that already in maybe 2 answers, both times you have vaguely apologetically name-checked the Cooper's Chase mob, like you're being disloyal to them. You're doing these interviews and clearly there's part of you that's wired to go, God, I hope they don't feel like I'm playing away.
Well, do you know what? Well, first, yes. So disloyalty to the characters, of course. But funnily enough, as soon as I realised that both of these books could exist at the same time, I thought it was okay. I thought, listen, Joyce and Elizabeth, they're just watching TV in another county, so that's okay. But it's a reader's thing, really. I've had a career of, you try and make something good, and then you try and make something else good, and you have to just bring readers with you. And so I had this guilt of just saying to readers, I honestly know that you wanted a 5th Thursday Murder Club book. I absolutely get that that's what you think you wanted. I'll tell you now, you're going to enjoy this book. And in a couple of years' time, you'll want the second one of this one. And I'm going to keep doing Thursday Murder Club, but I'm going to keep doing this. And it's just that idea of saying to readers, I promise you're in safe hands. I promise if you like the stuff that I do, you're going to like this one too.
You're the musician doing the stadium gig who gets up and says, I'm going to play something from the new album, and the mood just palpably drops in the room.
Exactly. So you have to absolutely sort of hammock it between 2 absolute bangers. That's the key. And then in next year's tour, the new material is the banger. So, that's always the transition people have to make.
Are you an Agatha Christie reader?
Yeah, I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. I think about Christie a lot when I write, actually, because she would write 2 books a year. She would absolutely churn this stuff out, and it's endured and it's lasted. And, she's not somebody who spent 5 years writing a book and panicked over every single, sentence. She just thought, what's going to entertain people today? And that's the thing that's lasted. And that's what I was trying to think with We Solve Murders. I was thinking, think in 20 years' time. Don't worry about this year. Just think in 20 years' time, what do you want people to know of you? What do you want people to have read of you? And, it's all going to be part of that jigsaw, hopefully.
The Christie parallel, I think, is definitely an earned one. And the Cooper's Chase Marple vibes giving way to a more Poirot kind of template for this one in terms of where you can go and how you can make it play. I'm interested in your description of loving a particular kind of airport thriller. I can't remember the last time I read something in that genre that brought such ineffable Englishness to it.
Yeah, listen, Michael, that's all I have. That's as an author, when you sit down, what is it that you have? Of course you can think of plots, of course you can have ideas, and of course you can have different characters, but everything comes from inside you. And, I can't help but to come from some wit and some humor and seeing the ridiculousness of life. But I love these big, bold, thrillery type things as well. And so it wasn't deliberately me thinking, oh, this would be funny, combining the two of those. It's me thinking, well, I want to write that, but I can't write it in any other way than the way I write. My fingers are on the keys of the keyboard, and they don't do what I tell them. They do what they want to do, and that is to entertain and to see how funny and ridiculous the world is, and hopefully make you cry a little bit as well and talk about love. But I can't help but write that way.
Those fingers type the word Twix without you even controlling them.
Exactly that. Weirdly, every time I do start a new book or a new something, I think, oh, maybe I wonder if this is the one where actually I find that I'm going to be very, very serious this time, and I'm going to write a proper kind of, Booker Prize-winning 600-page novel. And as you say, within 3 pages, I'm writing about Twixes and, sausage rolls. And I think, oh, no, listen, it's going to be more of the same. But just my note to myself is always, make it brilliant. Make it as great as you can do. Make it something you're proud of.
Look, the only thing you're pointing to there is the short-sightedness of Booker judges. And one day, Twix and sausage rolls will be what they're looking for. I have no doubt. There is a scene in the 4th Thursday Murder book where it's Christmas and they're unwrapping presents for each other. And it's a page of almost pure dialogue without reference to who's speaking at any given point, because you simply don't need it. The characters are so well formed at this point. You know them so well that through what they say, they are unmistakable at all times. I'm interested that you turned your attention, you turned your labours to the novel rather than to TV, which you know so well, in a kind of dramatic or comedic sense.
Yeah, I think because you can be inside people's heads far more. And so I love writing dialogue. I mean, it's a joy. And so, yeah, you would naturally think, well, that would lead one to screenplays and what have you. And, that sort of thing is fun. But I love writing dialogue, but then I like going inside someone's head, and I like hearing the stuff that they haven't said, or hearing their misunderstanding of what it is that they have said, or just that stuff where full well anytime you have a conversation with people, there's lots of stuff that isn't being said, which is as interesting as what is being said. And in a novel, you can just do that. And also you can go into different people's heads and different people's characters. You can write in different voices. And I love to do that. So for me, yes, naturally my skill set should be screenplays and stuff like that. But actually, weirdly, the second I started writing books in other people's voices, I was like, oh, I love this. I love exploring, someone's, internal monologue and seeing what drives them, because, all day, every day we meet people and we don't know what's just happened to them. We don't know where they've just come from. We don't know, a terrible thing that's just befallen them. We don't know what their childhood was like. But in novels, you can find that out and you can get to know people, more and more and more. And as you say, by the 4th Thursday Murder Club, these people are so real to me, and I think also to the readers. And that's something you can't do quite as well with a screenplay, I don't think.
The other thing by that 4th book is a bit what you're describing happened to you with Rosie. I mean, I do think about that as a peculiarly Richard Osman problem, which is you have characters walk on clearly for the purpose of one scene or one function in the context of the plot, and suddenly 2 books later, 3 books later, they're part of your cast of characters. You are, and I say this with admiration and affection, but you are very bad at letting characters go. Like once they come on, you're like, oh no, they're back. I need to have my universe expand.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's funny because with Thursday Murder Club, again, the Bogdan is a character from that, and he was a very, very bit part very early on. And yet by the 4th Thursday Murder Club book, it snowballs and you've got all these characters who've sort of turned up. I cannot have a new character come into a book and be a cipher or someone boring. I can't. It just doesn't interest me. I always think my wife is an actor, and I always just think if you were to have a small part in this film and it was this part of this character in this scene, then I want you to go, oh my God, this character's great. I hate that thing of someone's a shopkeeper or someone's, a delivery driver or anything like that. Yeah, if the second you give anybody a hinterland, then you can write about them again. And if you do want to write a series, in this book, there's a border security guy in America at a private airport called Carlos Moss. And I just, again, so here's the way of the sort of writing process. I know when you go to America, it's terrifying to go through customs, right? Because the guys and the women who do border patrol in America do not want you to be there. You feel terrible. You feel like a criminal. So I thought, great, I'm going to write a scene where Steve, who does not want to be coming to America in the first place, has to go past a border security guy and needs something. So I thought, I can see where humor comes. But the second Carlos Moss starts talking to Steve, I'm like, oh my God, you're great. I love you. You're far more than just this border security guy who's going to be trouble. And he's a perfect example of someone where you think, okay, you're only supposed to be here as a comic foil for one scene, but I loved what you said so much and the way you said it. There's no way I'm not going to bring you back in the next book. Of course you're going to come back because I love who you are. So yeah, I do. I store trouble up for myself by falling in love with characters.
I'm curious that addiction to kind of making no character a bit part. Did that come back to bite you with the adaptation for Thursday Murder Club? I know the film is shooting at the moment. Did they go, oh no, we have to cut these extraneous characters because it's just too expensive?
It's just, it's just an entirely different skill set. I've been around television and film long enough to know that they have to do their version. They've got to make like a 2-hour version of this book, which if you really did everything would be 7.5 hours, something like that, maybe. They have to make something entirely different, which they are absolutely doing. And I am staying out of it. I go along to set and that's really good fun and everyone's lovely to me and I love all that. But I said to them from the beginning, I'm not going to interfere. And I think they didn't believe me because I'm sure all authors say that. But actually, I'm not going to interfere because it's really hard to write a book. And if I had 15 people telling me every 5 minutes how to do it, I wouldn't be able to do it. And it's really hard to make a film. And it's not fair on them for me to say, yeah, but I would do it this way. You think, yeah, but you're not doing it. Someone else is doing it. So it's sort of nice to kind of let somebody else get on with it, and we shall see what happens with it. But yeah, you either do it all yourself or you do none of it yourself, I think, with a film.
I can't remember, and I haven't done sufficient research to go and kind of cross-check this, but, they're pretty starry actors who are being cast in the adaptation. And I'm curious, it seems likely to me that Joyce would have had views on Pierce Brosnan, for example, at some point in the books, surely.
Well, it's fascinating. So I was down on the set the other day and Pierce is there, and he is the most handsome man in the world. He's so insanely handsome, and bless him, he dresses down for Ron, but he's still Pierce Brosnan. And I was talking to him about it. I said, firstly, Pierce Brosnan is an unbelievably great comic actor, which I think people forget. But I said to Pierce, here's the absolute key to your casting. I said, you are who Ron would have chosen to play himself. So yeah, it's. I see it purely as icing. It's and we'll see what happens.
I am extremely excited for the screen adaptation of the Thursday Murder Club and with whatever Richard writes next. His latest book is called We Solve Murders, and it's widely available now. Before we go, you might have seen this week the announcement of the 2024 Booker Prize shortlist. It's a terrific list of 6 titles. Some of my favourite books of the past 12 months are there. But the notable inclusion for local readers is Charlotte Wood's Stoneyard Devotional. It's an absolutely exquisite novel, and it's so exciting to see it there on the list. It's the first time an Australian's been shortlisted for the Booker since Richard Flanagan 10 years ago, when he went on to win for The Narrow Road to the Deep North. So I recommend you read Stoneyard Devotional, and once you're done, go to the Read This archive and find the episode with Charlotte discussing the book. It's a beautiful conversation, and we are super excited for her. You can find it, all the rest of the shortlist, and the books of Richard Osman at your favourite independent bookstore. That's it for this week's show. If you enjoyed it, please tell your friends, rate and review us. It helps a lot, and we're Only a few ratings shy of 300 on the Apple Podcast app, so help tip us over the edge this week. That'd be fun. Next week on Read This, I'm joined by Ruman Alam, author of the award-winning novel Leave the World Behind, and he's talking about the genesis of his newest book, Entitlement.
A long time ago, my husband said to me about a friend of ours. She's kind of like a chronically single woman, at the time approaching midlife. And he said, I think at a certain point, you should be allowed to marry yourself and throw a big party, and everyone has to give you a gift and sort of treat it the same way that they would treat it if you were getting married to another person. A not cruel joke, but kind of like a funny observation. And that really stayed with me. I remembered that moment. And at some point, I had this idea about a woman choosing to marry an apartment.
Read This is produced and edited by Clara Ames. The show is mixed by Travis Evans, with original compositions by Zoltan Fetcher. Thanks for listening. See you next week.